Hi folks, it's Dave, and today I'm going to be talking to you about gourd stitch and peyote stitch and 2-drop gourd stitch and 2-drop peyote stitch and 3-drop peyote stitch and why there is so much confusion around these things. And I'm going to illustrate exactly what each one is, and you can take a good look at it and you can kind of see why there was so much confusion about it. And then towards the end of the video, I will hopefully kind of blow your mind. It certainly blew my mind when I first realized that this was the case. So thank you for watching, and the three of you that are out there in YouTube land that wanted to watch a video about beads, I'm glad to have you here. So peyote stitch and gourd stitch, they form a fabric of beads, and the beads are usually wrapped around an object and bound tightly to the object, but the fabric itself could be taken away from the object, and it'll stand on its own. The beads all hold together, and so sometimes these are referred to as off loom types of beadwork. But so peyote stitch, gourd stitch, what's 2-drop, what's 3-drop, that's what we're going to be working on today. So let's take a look at some actual beadwork and kind of discuss the differences between them. The one on the left is gourd stitch and the one on the right is peyote. And the thing I want you to look at the most is the angles that the beads seem to form. Gourd stitch tends to have a lower angle, more like a 30-degree angle, and peyote stitch tends to form more like 45-degree angles around each bead. Looking at it in a more abstract way makes it a little bit more clear kind of what the pattern of the beads is, what the bead matrix actually looks like. Now, it's interesting to know that gourd stitch can be done so that it seems to slope in either direction. So you need to keep that in mind. So what is the 2-drop thing and the 3-drop thing, and what makes that different? Peyote stitch is constructed one bead at a time in rows. The short answer is that it takes 2 rows to get back to the same bead in the pattern that you started with. Now, gourd stitch is constructed the same way. Again, it's 1 bead at a time in rows. The difference is that it takes 3 rows of gourd stitch to get back to the same bead that you started with in the bead pattern. So the reason that these are called drop patterns harkens back to the late part of the 19th century when folks like William Morris were making repeating pattern designs on wallpaper and fabric and things like that. And since the patterns appeared to drop as they went down the sheet of wallpaper or the fabric, that's why they started being called drop designs. So right about now, you're thinking to yourself, okay, that's not really all that confusing. What's the problem? Well, some folks started doing peyote stitch and they started doing variations on the peyote stitch. And so the 2 examples on the right, I call 2-bead peyote or 3-bead peyote, but other people call them 2-drop or 3-drop. This is not the same kind of drop, and what's really happening there is that they are both still 2-drop peyote, but you're using 2 beads in place of 1 bead or 3 beads in place of 1 bead. So this is where some of the confusion comes from. Now some folks insist on calling the 3-drop pattern gourd stitch and the 2-drop pattern peyote stitch, and I was one of them for quite a long time. The 3-drop pattern is a remarkable thing because it is much more flexible about going around oddly shaped objects, things like vases or gourds, for instance, and that's one of the reasons that it was called gourd stitch. The peyote stitch, on the other hand, because of the way it's set up, is not very flexible at all, and it can be wrapped around things that are a cylinder shape, for instance, but doesn't seem to do a very good job when wrapped around things that expand or contract. And so when you have beads, you have an object that's expanding or contracting, and you're trying to maintain that two-drop relationship, you can often run into some pretty odd problems. And in this example, the poor bead worker did a really good job on the top, and then on the bottom, where he was trying to put all of the error, he realized that the tapered pipe stem that he was making really didn't lend itself to a two-drop peyote stitch, and so he started having all kinds of weird problems with holes in the bead pattern and how does he make his beads go together to look right. And yes, this was me about 25 years ago. If we take a good look at the peyote stitch, the two drop pattern, then you'll notice that it has some very strong lines. The lines of beads show up, the vertical lines and the lines on the 45-degree axes are very strong, and so patterns that are based on those will show up very well. The horizontal line is not very strong at all. When we look at gourd stitch also has very strong lines in it. The vertical lines are strong, and the 30-degree and 60-degree axes are strong, and again, the horizontal line is pretty weak. So let's take a look at these diagonal lines and kind of figure out what to call them, because they're going to become very important as we go forward. And I'm going to show you the way that that poor bead worker 25 years ago could have solved his problem. We're going to call the yellow line the S line. We're going to call the red line the Z line. And they're named after the letters that have the same slope as the lines that we're working with. This is a pretty common convention. Weavers use this same terminology for yarn. Yarn can be either S-twisted or Z-twisted. So if you're doing peyote stitch around an object and the object starts to expand, as long as you do not try to keep that two-drop relationship and let the beads slip, then they will change themselves into a three-drop relationship or a gourd stitch. And that is the big secret. Another part of the secret is you have to maintain the relationship on either the S line or the Z line. In this particular instance, I'm maintaining it on the Z line, and that's causing the beads to slip into the proper orientation for a gourd stitch. And this is how I could have saved myself 25 years ago. So I hope you enjoyed my revelation there. It took me years to figure this out, and in spite of having the answer right in front of me the whole time. And so thanks for watching, and I hope that you got something out of this. It was pretty earth-shaking to me when I came upon the realization that gourd stitch and peyote stitch were the same thing, and it was really hard to come to grips with that for a little while because I couldn't understand how it worked. I had been told that that was the case, but it was obvious to me that it was not the case. And so it took a long time to figure out that sure enough it was the case. And so hopefully this has helped you, and I am going to be doing some more beadworking videos in the future, actually showing you how to do some of these things and showing you some really exciting things that can be done with gourd stitch and peyote stitch, and how you can move beads around to make particular designs that you would like to make. Thank you for watching. By all means, do the subscribe thing and like it if you do like it. And thank you for watching.